A little spread out.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Hemant, for that great panel. It was really interesting. It's a real honor and pleasure to welcome Hemant Taneja with us. Hemant is an investor, founder, and author. He's a managing partner of General Catalyst and Adams Partner. And we're honored to be LPs in General Catalyst and have been for now a while. Hemant has led investments, and listen to this list, pretty impressive. Airbnb, Stripe, Livongo, Snap, Olive Applied, Intuition, Grammarly, Gusto, Rowe, and Warby Parker. He was born in India and moved to Boston with his family while he was in high school. He has 5 degrees from MIT, 3 undergraduate and 2 graduate degrees. What's interesting is how diverse they are. Electrical engineering, computer science, as well as operations, research, mathematics, and biology. Your mother gave me this. What do you want from me?
Sounds like it.
In addition to his investment work, Hemant serves on the Stanford School of Medicine Board of Fellows, has worked on climate and energy issues as a co-founder and chairman of Advanced Energy Economy. And today, what we're going to talk about is 3 of his books. Intended Consequences, his most recent book, Unhealthcare, and Unscaled. First of all, welcome on behalf of all of us. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
You know, before I ask you some questions, I think it's great for me to get to know you better. Moving from India as a high school student to the States probably was a challenge. How did that sort of the immigrant experience affect you personally, and what you decided to do, and frankly your outlook, your life outlook?
Yeah. So we moved here because my parents, they were sponsored for a green card by my dad's brother, who had been in the States since the 60s. And, you know, we were a lower middle class family. You maybe get lucky, you get a break, but it's very hard to get a great education there. And so my parents were like, hey, why don't we uproot everything, go to the US, and my sister and I could then have a good education. So when I think about the immigrant experience, to me, it's about risk. It's about the ability to take risk, and that's something I have just always taken with me in every decision that I have made. Ironically, my dad would always have me take the lower risk path afterwards, because they took a risk, it worked out, and get a cushy job and whatnot. I would always remind him of what got him there and to a much better lifestyle, and that that entrepreneurial spirit, the ability to take risks, is ultimately has to be a lifelong mindset.
Now, I mentioned the fact that you studied 5 degrees, and I understood you were thinking about being a teacher. And when you mentioned risk, I think in Israel the average class size is 40 kids. You know what teaching, you want to talk about risk? Teaching 40 Israeli kids. But putting that aside, you decide not to be a teacher. The thinking, was that, help me through that.
Yeah, one of my, there's this mathematical construct called the greedy algorithm, which is you always look at what's the most interesting next thing you can go do and in terms of optimization, versus this idea of beginning with an end in mind, and sort of, the classic interview question, where do you see yourself doing in 5 years? I just don't believe in that. And so what was happening in 1999 was I was about to start my dissertation, which would have definitely led me down the path of being an academic. And meanwhile, all my classmates were starting companies on the MIT campus. It just felt like a moment in time where you had to be part of it. And mobile was starting to happen, so I said, you know what, I'll take a sabbatical. I got yelled at by my parents, going back to the don't take the risky path. Dropped out to do a startup. If you all remember, 1999, mobile was very early. So I ended up selling that business early, and then now my partners at General Catalyst, David, Joel, and others, they had just started this firm. It was about a year old. And they asked me to come for 4 months after I sold my business to come be an EIR and think about doing something again in mobile. I was 26. I made a lot of mistakes in my first company. I was like, heck, I should quit this cushy job that I have now, go back and take a shot again and build another business. Again, got yelled at by my dad. You see a pattern here. And actually came as an EIR for 4 months to join the firm. Never thought I was going to be an investor. It was to learn from my mistakes and build a better company. 20 years later, obviously, I'm still here.
Let's switch now to your books. Yeah, and thank you for being here, by the way, as an investor of yours. Switching your books and particularly intended consequences. There was, I think it's 50 years ago, the New York Times Magazine published Milton Friedman's famous essay that social responsibility is to increase, social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. When you're in a world now of ESG, in a world of thinking differently about this, is that even relevant anymore? And profits, when I think profits, I'm thinking only shareholder value. And I think he was thinking only shareholder value. Talk a little bit about how you think the world's changed, and most importantly, what does that mean for VCs?
Yeah, so let me talk about 50 years ago, 20 years ago, and today, right? So when you think about most businesses, they're at the intersection of technology, policy, and capital. So 50 years ago, you were given the policy constructs of what you can and can't do in any given industry. Here's the rules in the financial services area. Here's all the compliance rules in healthcare. And you built a business that essentially was navigating getting market share inside of those rules, right? So that mindset, that the Milton Friedman mindset of focus on profits, perhaps made sense in that construct. If you think about 20 years ago, and really for the last 40 years, we've been doing this open-ended software innovation, and we were essentially using software as a tool to bring some efficiency into that business construct, right? When I got in the business, we started investing. We would invest in building software companies to bring efficiency to doctors, to supply chain managers, to educators, right? To all the personas, to consumers. But if you think about what happens today, that's not what we do. We build healthcare companies, we build financial services companies, we build schools, we build banks. And so now we're going back to building the same kinds of businesses we were building 50 years ago, but with technology, but with this digital transformation, right? Where we're actually organizing content, community, commerce, care, capital online. So what's different now? What's different now is you don't have those detailed policy constructs when you are doing software-defined policy. So what happens? You have a social media company that gets to decide if a president is allowed to speak or not, right? So all of a sudden, the responsibility that has been put on our companies, the companies that we all build together as investors and entrepreneurs, is far, far greater than what the companies were expected to do 50 years ago when that paper came out. So I think that mindset just is it's obsolete. Why? Because the policy frameworks just are nowhere near as sophisticated, and so much of the technology policy capital interplay actually happens in software algorithms. And so as a result, we have to take on that responsibility to put these businesses on the right side of history.
Very super interesting. And so let's put this in reality. Take a sector. Healthcare, on everybody's mind, obviously, last couple of years. The U.S. healthcare system has been going through dramatic changes, or, well, actually hasn't gone through the dramatic changes a lot of people like you think. And so, it'd be interesting to say, apply this now to a sector like healthcare, what you just mentioned. What do you got to do? Is it starting with like a blank page and thinking about what do we do to redo the system bottom up, as opposed to a shift?
We're trying to think that way. So what's the issue with our healthcare system in the United States? It's 18 to 20% of GDP. It's practically bankrupting us. And I think if you asked any of the consumers or did an NPS analysis, the experience actually fundamentally sucks, right? So we spend 20% of GDP on something that is a terrible experience overall. I think there are some reasons for that. One of the primary ones being who pays, who decides, who benefits. They're different people, So it's just this fundamentally misaligned business model that has led us down this path of this volumetric system, and it's breaking us. And so I've written about this before. COVID has been essentially the iPhone moment for this industry because it really sort of brought it to its knees, and we have an opportunity to rethink what the system should really look like. And if I said, let's take a blank sheet of paper and design what the healthcare system should look like 10 years from now, and you can call me naive, but let's just go through that exercise, you would say it needs to accomplish three things. Okay, first of all, it needs to design for proactive care. Because after all, what we don't want is expensive sick care, we want to stay healthy. That's what would be the high NPS experience if you actually designed it for everybody. Second is, do it in a way that you reduce the cost of overall healthcare. So you want to reduce the GDP of healthcare, and I use that line because we're early investors in Stripe, and Patrick always used to say, increase the GDP of internet. By contrast, in this industry, we have a responsibility to actually reduce the healthcare spend. And the third thing is do it in a way that you leave nobody behind. So health equity has to be a core idea, and that is about inner cities, but it's also about rural America, like where you can't get care, and sort of designing systems to do that. So we set down that path to say, hey, if you could build a modern set of companies as we organize care on the internet, could we follow these principles and actually build an ecosystem of companies that help us get there?
And that's what Livongo was all about, essentially.
Yeah, look, so Livongo, for those of you who don't know, it's a company we incubated. It focused on providing what I would call health assurance. I think our first principles led to calling it health assurance eventually, but these are the things we focused on. When we built it, it was for consumers with chronic conditions. Diabetes was costing $300+ billion a year, and it's progressively becoming worse, and it's a very manageable disease. And so we ended up deciding to tackle it and say, hey, can we actually bend the cost curve, put a solution together that can maybe take $100 billion out of that $300 billion if you really rolled it out. And that ended up being a good success for us. The metric I would point you to, it had higher NPS than Apple. Okay, so I think to build that as a healthcare service company was like the greatest achievement. Obviously, it was a good investment and a good outcome, but we were able to prove you could build great consumer experiences in healthcare, and that really set us down the path of sort of thinking much more systemically about health assurance.
I think COVID also showed that the education system, the education system is going through the same iPhone moment, I would expect, as a result of COVID too. I mean, you look at, it's one thing if you're an MBA student at Harvard, and you've got student loans and the likelihood of you being able to pay those off. It's another thing if you're a history major, and how you're going to get those paid off, or you're a social worker. It's clear that the education system is screwed up. What are you guys, are you doing something similar in education that you're doing? Is there an opportunity to make money in education investments like you guys have done in Livongo and the healthcare system?
Yeah, look, education is much harder to crack because it's actually a lot smaller market than healthcare. And it's got its own set of issues in terms of incumbency. If you work backwards from what the education system should look like, we probably have to move away from the Prussian system that was created, which is study for the first 20 years, which was essentially to create assembly line jobs, and then go work for the rest of your life, into a mindset of lifelong learning. And we have been doing a lot of work in thinking through what does that really mean. Because I think the answer isn't everybody should go do the high-paying jobs and don't do social work. Because as a society, we actually need all jobs to become, sort of productive enough that people can have a good quality of life and enjoy what they want to work on from a purpose standpoint. And so we actually, my most, I suppose, expensive and important investment was we built a K-12 school under Khan Academy where my kids go. So we actually built a lifelong learning system and rethought, Sal Khan and we built the school, rethought what K-12 education ought to look like. And our kids have been sort of learning with that idea that it's not about 8 o'clock in the morning, you're 12 years old and you become great at factoring polynomials, because that's what the existing system does. It's all about learning how to learn, so you're able to pick up skills that you want along the way. When we think about education, the other part of it that's really important to transform is workforce education. So you make choices, you go get a job, and then our existing system, we're largely stuck as to what path you're going to be able to take on from there. So we invested in this amazing founder, Rachel Carlson, and a company called Guild in Colorado. And they are working on partnering with employers, much like Livongo, but rethinking educational benefits. And how do you help folks migrate to new jobs, develop new skills, and have a more progressive career so you can actually make choices and navigate based on your interests as they evolve.
So you haven't given up the teaching part totally. Your dad's going to be happy. All right. Switching now to climate. I know this is an issue that is very dear to your heart. I think again the climate conference of 6 months ago probably was a watershed moment. What's the role for VCs here? Again, one of the questions I guess all of us want to do something good. Our hearts are there, but we still have to look in front of our investors and say, have we generated returns? So is it possible to do stuff in climate and make money on it?
So in 2006, I went down the path of actually convincing my partners we should build a clean tech practice, and I immersed myself for 5 years into that to focus on climate. And the reason for that was all the faculty and students at MIT were starting to go down that path. The movie Inconvenient Truth had come out, people were inspired, and it was all about supply-side innovation. The company, I would say, that had the most important impact on climate change was actually Tesla, because it built a consumer product that everybody wanted. It forced an entire industry to move towards electrification. What that did was turned one of our energy systems, which was on fossil fuels, into an application on the power grid, which created new demand, and you could actually then have a path to do energy transition. Right? I mean, that's really what makes Tesla really interesting. The entire industry had to compete and change itself, and they're all going down electrification, and you created a energy transition path. So when I first did it, it was all about supply-side innovations and trying to build companies, that were building cellulosic ethanol and a new solar cell and carbon sequestration. This time around, I think there's going to be a lot of demand-side innovations which force supply-side innovation. That's like the big mindset shift. And I can tell you, I try to forget about my scars on the back because I failed miserably. I mean, imagine having a portfolio of 15 companies, they all just go to zero, which is what happened that time around. To forget that and re-engage in this industry because there are so many amazing entrepreneurs. Again, they're going to go take a shot at it. And I do think this time there's enough learnings from the last time that we have a shot of starting to make a dent with some valuable businesses.
So coming full circle to the Milton Friedman line. Based on what you're saying, they're not mutually exclusive. In other words, you can make, you can generate huge shareholder value, and yet generate great value for society.
Look, we're capitalists. You wouldn't invest in us if we were trying to think like impact investors. I think the fundamental belief, if you think about it as investors, is the very best investments for us end up being ones that compound for a long, long time, right? We invested in the seed round of Stripe, and we invested in the $36 billion round in we led the $36 billion round in 2020, a decade later. Why? Because we think the best investments compound, and we want to keep investing in them. The belief today, given the responsibility that I talked about earlier, and the complexity of the businesses that we're building, is that the only businesses that will compound for a long time are the ones that society allows to compound, which means they have to be in the interest of society. So I think this idea that you can be financial investors or societal investors is not going to work. It's a false choice. They're fully aligned, and we have to build companies with the right mindsets and mechanisms to help them endure for the long term.
Hemant, thank you so much. This was a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.